Rain hammered the windshield like 1,000 angry fists as Lieutenant Sarah Collins guided the unmarked cruiser off the interstate and into the neon-soaked decay of Lakewood Heights. The wipers fought a losing battle against the downpour, smearing red and blue reflections across the glass in hypnotic patterns. Beside her, in the specially designed compartment, Max pressed his nose against the mesh barrier, his amber eyes tracking every shadow that slipped past the vehicle. The Belgian Malinois had been restless since they left the precinct, pacing in tight circles, whining at frequencies only he could hear. Sarah had learned to trust those signals more than any dispatch report. The call had come in 40 minutes ago. Welfare check at the Riverside Motel, a forgotten establishment squatting at the corner of Metropolitan and Despair. Guest in room 14 had not been seen in 3 days. Housekeeping had noticed an odor. Management wanted police involvement before they opened that door themselves. Routine as it got in this line of work, except nothing about tonight felt routine. The air itself seemed charged, pregnant with violence waiting to be born. Sarah turned onto Metropolitan Parkway and immediately spotted the motel's flickering sign. Half its letters burned out, so it read only Vers de Motel. The parking lot held a scattered collection of vehicles in various stages of automotive death, their windows fogged, their tires flat, their stories untold. She counted 3 working streetlights in the entire complex. The rest had been shot out or simply surrendered to entropy. This was the kind of place where people came to disappear, where cash talked and questions died in the throat. She pulled into a spot near the office and killed the engine. The rain immediately swallowed the silence, drumming against the roof in relentless percussion. Through the water-streaked window, she could see a figure hovering behind the office glass, watching her arrival with the nervous energy of a man standing on a trap door. Sarah reached for her radio. "Dispatch, this is Lieutenant Collins. 10:23 at Riverside Motel, Metropolitan Parkway, beginning welfare check on room 14. K-9 unit on scene." The radio crackled back. "Copy that. Lieutenant, backup is 20 minutes out. Pile up on I-85 has units tied up. 20 minutes. In this neighborhood, 20 minutes was a lifetime." She acknowledged the transmission and stepped out into the rain. The water hit her like a cold slap, instantly soaking through her uniform jacket. She moved to the rear door and released Max, who bounded out with his ears pricked forward, immediately cataloguing every scent the storm carried. His tactical harness gleamed wet and black against his tawny fur. The motel manager met her at the office door, a thin man with a comb-over plastered to his scalp and sweat stains visible even through his damp shirt. His name tag read Dennis, though the S had been scratched off, leaving Denny in faded plastic. His eyes darted between Sarah, the dog, and the parking lot behind her, never settling, never still. "You the one who called it in," Sarah said. It was not a question. Dennis nodded rapidly, his Adam's apple bobbing like a fishing lure. 3 days, no movement. Maid tried to clean yesterday, but the chain was on. She said she could smell something through the door, something bad. I got policies about breaking down doors. Got to have police present. Insurance requirements. Sarah studied him. The nervous energy felt excessive, even for a man who might be about to discover a corpse on his property. "You know who rented the room?" Dennis produced a registration card from his pocket, already prepared, too prepared. The handwriting on it was neat and obviously false. John Smith, paid cash for a week. That was 6 days ago. Description: white male, 40s maybe, average height, average build, average everything, wore a baseball cap low, kept his head down, drove a dark sedan. Nothing memorable about it. Sarah pocketed the card. "Key?" Dennis handed over a plastic key card, the kind that had been obsolete for a decade at any reputable establishment. "Room 14 is around the corner," he said. "End of the row. You want me to come with you? Stay here. If I need you, I will call." She did not wait for his response. Max was already moving toward the corner of the building, his nose working the wet air, his body language shifting from alert to intense. Sarah followed, one hand resting on the grip of her service weapon, the other holding the keycard. The rain continued its assault, turning the walkway into a shallow river that tugged at her boots. Room 14 sat at the end of a row of identical doors, each one painted a shade of green that might have been cheerful 30 years ago, but now looked like mold. A single bulb burned above the door, casting a sickly yellow cone that barely penetrated the darkness. The window curtains were drawn tight, not a sliver of light escaping. Sarah noted the "Do Not Disturb" sign hanging from the handle, weathered and faded, as if it had been there for years rather than days. Max reached the door first and immediately dropped into a tracking posture, his nose pressed to the gap at the bottom of the frame. His body went rigid. A low growl rumbled in his chest, so quiet Sarah felt it more than heard it. She had seen this behavior 100 times. Her partner had found something, and whatever it was not good. She knocked 3 times, loud and official. Atlanta police. Welfare check. Open the door, please. Silence. Not even the sound of movement inside. She knocked again. Police, I am coming in. The keycard slid into the slot with a mechanical click. The light turned green. Sarah pushed the door open 6 inches and stopped, letting Max take point. The smell hit her first, a complex bouquet of decay, old food, cigarette smoke, and something chemical she could not immediately identify. Max pushed through the gap, his body low, his movements precise. Sarah followed, weapon drawn, flashlight mounted. The room was a disaster, clothes scattered across every surface. The bed torn apart, mattress askew. Fast food containers colonized the desk, their contents transformed into unrecognizable sculptures of mold. A television lay face down on the floor, its screen shattered. The chair had been overturned, one leg broken. Every drawer in the dresser stood open, emptied, their contents dumped in piles. Someone had searched this room with desperate thoroughness, but no body, no victim, just the aftermath of violence and the lingering scent of fear. Sarah moved through the space systematically, checking corners, checking the closet, checking under the bed. Max worked parallel to her, his nose cataloguing every molecule of the chaos. He paused at certain spots, circled others, building a scent map that only he could read. Near the closet, he sat and looked at Sarah, his signal that he had found something significant. She approached and found what had caught his attention. Dark stains on the carpet, partially hidden by a thrown jacket. Not large enough for a fatal wound, but enough to indicate serious injury. Someone had bled here, and someone had tried to cover it up. The bathroom door stood closed at the far end of the room. Through the gap at the bottom, Sarah could see darkness. No light, no movement, but something else. Max had been moving toward it, tracking the scent trail that led from the bloodstains toward that closed door. Then he stopped. Sarah watched her partner freeze mid-stride. His ears, usually pricked forward in tracking mode, flattened against his skull. His tail, normally carried high and confident, dropped and tucked. A whine escaped his throat, high and thin, the sound of an animal confronting something that violated every instinct he possessed. Max, heel. The dog did not move. His eyes remained fixed on that bathroom door, his body trembling with the effort of holding position against every nerve that screamed at him to retreat. Sarah felt the temperature in the room drop, though she knew it was psychological, a response to her partner's fear translating into her own nervous system. In 7 years of working together, through shootouts and drug busts and search and rescue operations in impossible conditions, she had never seen Max refuse a command. He had faced down armed suspects, tracked through burning buildings, leaped into freezing rivers. Fear was not in his vocabulary. Until now. "Max," Sarah said again, her voice softer, "with me, boy." The Malinois whined again, but held his ground. His eyes darted to Sarah, pleading, then back to the door. Every line of his body communicated a single message: do not go in there. Sarah approached the bathroom door alone, her weapon leading. The smell intensified as she drew closer, that chemical undertone becoming sharper, more distinct. She recognized it now. Bleach. Someone had tried to clean something, and the combination of bleach and decomposition created an olfactory signature that turned her stomach. She reached for the handle, turned it slowly. The door swung inward on hinges that screamed for oil. Darkness greeted her, absolute and complete. Her flashlight beam cut through it, revealing white tile, a toilet with its lid down, a sink with rust stains, and a bathtub concealed behind a plastic shower curtain decorated with faded flowers. The curtain was drawn closed. Something bulged behind it, distorting the pattern, pressing against the plastic. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She thought of every horror movie she had ever seen, every crime scene photo that haunted her dreams, every reason why her partner had refused to enter this room. She reached for the curtain. The plastic was cold and damp against her fingers. She pulled. The curtain rings scraped along the rod with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. The fabric fell away, revealing what lay behind it. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Her weapon dipped slightly as her brain struggled to process what her eyes were seeing. Not a body, not the corpse she had expected, not the source of the smell that still clawed at her nostrils. Instead, she found herself staring at a black leather suitcase, the expensive kind, with combination locks and reinforced corners. It sat in the dry tub, propped against the tile wall, mundane and terrifying in equal measure. Around it, scattered like offerings at an altar, were Polaroid photographs, dozens of them, their surfaces catching her flashlight beam in flat white rectangles. Sarah holstered her weapon and pulled on latex gloves. She picked up the nearest photograph and felt the world tilt beneath her feet. The image showed a man in a suit, his face clearly visible, shaking hands with another man whose features were equally distinct. Both were smiling, professional, legitimate, except Sarah recognized them both. The first was Marcus Webb, Assistant District Attorney for Fulton County, a man she had testified before on multiple occasions. The second was Captain William Drake, her own commanding officer at Atlanta PD. She picked up another photograph. Webb again, this time handing an envelope to a third man, someone she did not recognize. A fourth photo showed Drake at a warehouse, pointing to something off-camera while men in tactical gear looked on. A fifth depicted both Webb and Drake together at what appeared to be a restaurant, leaning close in conversation, their expressions intense. Sarah worked through the photographs systematically, her gloved hands trembling slightly. Each image added another piece to a puzzle she had not known existed. Meetings in parking garages, exchanges of packages, handshakes with individuals whose faces screamed organized crime, even in still frames. Webb and Drake, prosecutor and police captain, working together in contexts that had nothing to do with justice. The suitcase beckoned. Sarah approached it carefully, checking for wires, for triggers, for any sign that opening it might be her last act. The locks were standard three-digit combinations. She tried the obvious sequences, 000, 111, 123. On her fourth attempt, 777, the locks clicked open. Inside, she found more photographs, these organized in manila envelopes labeled with dates. She found flash drives, a dozen of them, each marked with initials she did not recognize. She found documents, financial records, transaction logs, communications printed from emails that should never have existed. And she found a voice recorder, the old-fashioned kind that used microcassettes with a tape already loaded. She pressed play. The voice that emerged was thin and frightened, a man speaking quickly, urgently, as if he knew his time was limited. "My name is Robert Vargas. I am a witness in the federal investigation into the Martinez cartel. 3 weeks ago, I was approached by men who identified themselves as FBI agents. They said they were relocating me for my safety. They took me to a warehouse in College Park, where I saw things, heard things. They are not FBI. They are working with the cartel. They are eliminating witnesses, not protecting them. I have been gathering evidence because I know they will kill me eventually. If you are hearing this, I am probably dead. The men responsible are Marcus Webb, Assistant DA, and Captain William Drake of Atlanta PD. There are others, but these two are the heart of it. Everything you need is in this suitcase. Please, make it matter. Make my death matter. The recording ended with a click. Sarah stood in the bathroom of room 14, holding a dead man's testimony, surrounded by evidence that could bring down some of the most powerful men in Atlanta's justice system. Her commanding officer, a prosecutor she had trusted, a conspiracy that reached into the very institutions sworn to protect the innocent. A sound from the main room snapped her back to the present. Max's warning bark, sharp and urgent. Then the window exploded inward. Sarah dove for the floor as gunfire raked the room. Bullets punched through the thin walls, sending plaster dust and splinters flying. She heard Max's bark transform into a snarl, heard the thud of impact, heard a man scream. She rolled toward the bathroom door, suitcase clutched to her chest, and came up shooting. 2 figures in the doorway, dark clothes, ski masks, automatic weapons. One was down, Max's jaws locked around his forearm, the Malinois shaking his head with savage efficiency. The other was turning his weapon toward the dog, finger tightening on the trigger. Sarah fired twice. Center mass. The shooter crumpled. She was moving before he hit the ground, grabbing Max's harness, pulling him off the wounded man, heading for the shattered window. More vehicles were arriving in the parking lot, headlights cut through the rain like searchlights hunting escaped prisoners. She had seconds, maybe less. Max, window, go. The dog launched himself through the broken glass without hesitation, landing in the mud outside and immediately taking a defensive position. Sarah followed, the suitcase banging against the frame as she squeezed through. Rain hit her face, cool and cleansing. She oriented herself, spotted the tree line at the back of the property, and ran. Behind her, shouts, the crack of gunfire, bullets whipping past, close enough to hear their whispered threats. Max ran beside her, matching her pace, his ears flat, his focus absolute. They hit the tree line and kept going, crashing through underbrush, branches clawing at their faces. The motel's lights faded behind them, swallowed by darkness and distance. Sarah ran until her lungs burned and her legs screamed for mercy. She ran until the sounds of pursuit faded into the rhythm of the rain. She ran until she found herself at the edge of a drainage ditch, the water running fast and brown, carrying the storm's overflow toward some distant destination. She stopped, doubled over, gasping. Max stood guard beside her, his eyes scanning the darkness, his body coiled for action. The suitcase felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Sarah pulled out her phone, hands shaking, and tried to call dispatch. The screen showed no signal. She tried again. Nothing. Either the storm had knocked out towers, or someone was jamming communications. Neither option was comforting. She was alone, hunted, in possession of evidence that powerful men would kill to suppress. Her commanding officer was corrupt. Her chain of command was compromised. She could not go back to the precinct. She could not call for backup. Every cop who responded might be working for the other side. Think, Collins, think. The rain continued to fall. Max pressed against her leg, offering warmth and solidarity. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. But Sarah could not tell if it was searching for her or answering some other emergency in this city of perpetual crisis. She opened the suitcase and began sorting through its contents by the light of her phone's flashlight. She needed to understand what she had, needed to find leverage, needed to identify anyone who might be clean in a system rotted from within. The financial documents told a story of money moving in circles, laundered through shell companies, emerging clean on the other side. The emails detailed operations, targets, timelines, witnesses scheduled for elimination, their deaths disguised as accidents, overdoses, suicides. Robert Vargas had been thorough, meticulous, building a case that would have been devastating if he had lived to present it. Among the flash drives, she found one labeled RC. The initials tickled something in her memory. RC. Rodriguez, maybe. Or Richardson. Or Rachel Chen. The name surfaced from somewhere deep in her mental files. Rachel Chen, forensic accountant, had worked a case with Sarah 2 years ago involving embezzlement at a construction company. Smart, thorough, and most importantly, not a cop. She had moved to a private firm afterward, but Sarah still had her number somewhere in her contacts. She scrolled through her phone, praying for a signal. 1 bar flickered, then 2. She found the number and dialed. The phone rang 4 times before a sleepy voice answered. "Hello? Rachel, it is Sarah Collins, Atlanta PD. We worked the Hendricks case together." A pause. "Lieutenant Collins, it is 2 in the morning. What is... I need your help." Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "I need someone I can trust, and I do not know who else to call. I have evidence of something huge, and people are trying to kill me to get it back." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Sarah feared the call had dropped. Then Rachel's voice returned, fully awake now. "Where are you?" Sarah looked around, trying to orient herself. "Near the junction of Metropolitan and I-85. There is a drainage culvert by the industrial park. Stay there. I am coming. Give me 30 minutes. Rachel, you should know what you are getting into. This involves cops, high-ranking cops." Another pause. "I figured it might." "Stay hidden, Lieutenant. I am on my way." The call ended. Sarah tucked the phone away and settled into a position that offered some shelter from the rain while maintaining sight lines on the approach routes. Max curled beside her, his head resting on his paws. But his eyes remained open, watching, waiting. 30 minutes passed like 30 hours. Every sound in the darkness became a potential threat. Every rustle of wet leaves became footsteps. Every distant engine became a hunter closing in. Sarah's hand never left her weapon, her finger indexed along the frame, ready. When headlights finally appeared on the service road, she tensed. The vehicle stopped 50 yards away, and for a long moment nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened, and a figure emerged, hands raised, moving slowly into the beam of the headlights. "Sarah. It is Rachel. I am alone." Sarah rose from cover, keeping Max at her side. She approached cautiously, scanning for ambush, for secondary vehicles, for any sign of betrayal. But Rachel stood alone in the rain, her hair plastered to her face, her expression a mixture of concern and determination. "Get in." Rachel gestured to her car. "We need to get somewhere secure, and then you need to tell me everything." The drive took them across the city to a neighborhood Sarah did not recognize, rows of gentrified townhouses that had once been crack dens and now sold for $500,000 each. Rachel parked in an underground garage and led them up a private elevator to a unit on the 4th floor. The space was modern, minimalist, filled with the kind of furniture that cost more than Sarah made in a month. "My firm handles sensitive cases," Rachel explained, handing Sarah a towel. "We have security protocols. This building is not in my name, and the neighbors mind their own business." Max shook himself, spraying water across the hardwood floor, then settled on a rug near the door, still alert, still watching. Sarah dried her face and hands, then spread the contents of the suitcase across Rachel's dining table. For the next 2 hours they went through everything. Rachel's eyes widened as she reviewed the financial documents, her fingers flying across her laptop as she cross-referenced accounts and traced transactions. The picture that emerged was devastating. "This is not just corruption," Rachel said finally, pushing back from the table. This is a parallel justice system. Webb and Drake have been running their own operation for at least 5 years. Witnesses in cartel cases get flagged, relocated to controlled locations, and then eliminated. The cartel pays for each kill, the money gets laundered through these shell companies, and everyone walks away clean. How many? Rachel pulled up a spreadsheet. Based on these records, at least 37 confirmed eliminations, probably more that we cannot trace. These are witnesses who were supposed to be under federal protection, men and women who trusted the system to keep them safe. Sarah thought of Robert Vargas, alone in that motel room, recording his testimony with the knowledge that he was already dead. He had tried to do the right thing, and the system had devoured him for it. "We need to get this to someone," Sarah said. "FBI, federal prosecutors. Someone outside Atlanta's jurisdiction. That is the problem." Rachel pointed to one of the documents. "See these initials? They show up in communications about federal interdiction schedules. Someone at the Bureau is feeding information to Drake's network. We cannot trust anyone until we know how deep this goes. Then what do we do?" Rachel leaned back in her chair, chewing her lip. "I know someone. Investigative journalist, works for the Constitution. She has been digging into police corruption for years. If we give her this material, she can blow it wide open before anyone has a chance to bury it." A journalist. Sarah felt skepticism rising. "This is evidence in a criminal investigation. We cannot just hand it over to the press. Lieutenant, with respect, what investigation? You cannot report this to your chain of command, because your chain of command is compromised. You cannot take it to the DA because the DA's office is compromised. You cannot trust federal agencies because we do not know how far the rot extends. The only institution that might actually do something with this information is the Fourth Estate." Sarah stared at the documents spread across the table. Everything she had been taught about procedure, about evidence handling, about the proper channels for exposing corruption, warred with the reality of her situation. She was holding a bomb that could destroy careers, institutions, lives. The wrong move would get her killed and bury the evidence forever. The right move. "What is her name?" Sarah asked. "The journalist, Monica Reyes. She has broken 3 major stories this year. 2 of them led to indictments. She is careful, thorough, and she does not burn sources. Call her." Rachel made the call, while Sarah took Max outside for a quick patrol of the building's perimeter. The rain had softened to a drizzle, and the first hints of dawn were bleeding across the eastern sky. In a few hours, the city would wake up, and Sarah's absence from the precinct would be noticed. Drake would know that his team had failed to eliminate her. The hunt would intensify. When she returned to the apartment, Rachel was waiting with news. "Monica can meet us at noon. She wants to bring a photographer for documentation, but no one else. I told her the broad strokes, and she is very interested." "Where?" "Neutral ground." She suggested the King Center. Public enough to deter violence, private enough for a real conversation. The hours until noon stretched endlessly. Sarah tried to sleep but found herself staring at the ceiling, running scenarios, planning escape routes. Max dozed at the foot of the guest bed, his paws twitching with dreams that might have been chasing rabbits or chasing killers. Outside, the city slowly came to life, oblivious to the conspiracy rotting its foundations. At 11, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She almost deleted it as spam until she read the message. "Collins. We know you have the material. Return it, and this ends peacefully. Keep running, and we will find everyone you care about. You have until midnight." She showed the message to Rachel, who paled but kept her composure. "They are trying to scare you into making a mistake. If they knew where you were, they would not be texting." Sarah was not so sure. She thought about her apartment, her car, her gym membership, her usual routes through the city. How much of her life was documented in databases that Drake could access? How many colleagues might unwittingly reveal her patterns, her habits, her hiding spots? We stay on schedule, Sarah decided. Meet Monica, hand over the material, let the story break. Once it is public, killing me accomplishes nothing. The King Center occupied a complex of buildings in the Sweet Auburn district, a monument to the civil rights movement that had reshaped the nation. Sarah and Rachel arrived separately, approaching from different directions, watching for surveillance. Max stayed close to Sarah, his harness concealed under a loose jacket that made him look like any other well-trained pet. Monica Reyes was waiting near the reflecting pool, a compact woman with sharp eyes and a messenger bag slung across her shoulder. Her photographer, a bearded man with equipment bags hanging from both shoulders, stood a few feet away, pretending to frame shots of the architecture. Lieutenant Collins, Monica extended her hand. Rachel has told me quite a story. I am hoping you can fill in the details. Sarah glanced around the plaza. Tourists, students, locals enjoying the spring afternoon. Normal life flowing past while she prepared to detonate an earthquake beneath the city's power structure. Can we walk? They moved along the pathways that wound through the complex, past the eternal flame, past Dr. King's tomb, past the chapel where hope had once seemed infinite. Sarah talked, and Monica listened, occasionally asking questions, her recorder capturing every word. The photographer documented the meeting from discreet distances, creating a record that could never be disputed. "This is going to destroy people," Monica said when Sarah finished. "Families, careers, institutions." "Those institutions destroyed themselves," Sarah replied. "I am just shining a light on what they did in the dark." Monica nodded slowly. "I need to verify independently. Cross-reference names, dates, accounts. If everything checks out, we could publish by tomorrow evening. But I have to warn you. Lieutenant, once this story breaks, your life changes forever. You will be a hero to some and a traitor to others. You will testify before grand juries and congressional committees. You might end up in witness protection yourself." Sarah looked at Max, who stood watching the perimeter with tireless vigilance. "I became a cop to protect people," she said. "I cannot do that by staying silent while other cops murder witnesses for money. Whatever comes next, I can live with it." They parted ways at the edge of the complex, Monica heading back to her newsroom, Rachel returning to her safe house to continue analyzing the financial records. Sarah found herself alone with Max in a city that suddenly felt foreign, hostile, stripped of the certainty she had once taken for granted. Her phone buzzed again, another text from the unknown number. "Last chance, Collins?" She deleted it without responding and started walking. The afternoon passed in a blur of motion. Sarah moved through the city like a ghost, never staying in one place for more than an hour, paying cash for everything, avoiding cameras whenever possible. Max stayed alert beside her, his presence a comfort that went beyond tactical advantage. He was her partner, her friend, the one living being she could trust without reservation. As evening approached, she found herself at a small diner on the outskirts of Decatur, nursing a cup of coffee and watching the television mounted above the counter. The local news was covering a fire in Midtown, then a human interest piece about a dog show, then sports scores that meant nothing to her, normal programming for a normal city, as if the foundations were not about to crack. Her phone buzzed with a text from Monica. "Verification complete. Going to press with morning edition. Story will also post online at midnight. Thank you, Lieutenant. This is important." Sarah felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she had not realized she was carrying. It was done. Whatever happened next, the truth would be out. Webb and Drake could not unring that bell. She was paying her check when the diner's door opened and 3 men walked in. They wore suits, the kind that cost more than cops could afford, and they moved with the easy confidence of predators entering a hen house. Sarah's hand drifted toward her weapon as they scanned the room and locked onto her. Lieutenant Collins. The lead man smiled without warmth. Captain Drake would like a word. Sarah measured distances. The door was 20 feet away, blocked by the 3 men. The kitchen offered a potential exit but unknown hazards. The windows were plate glass, thick but breakable. Max was already on his feet, hackles raised, awaiting her command. "I am not going anywhere with you," she said. The lead man's smile widened. "We were hoping you would say that." They moved. Max moved faster. The Malinois launched himself at the nearest attacker, 70 pounds of muscle and teeth targeting the arm, reaching for a concealed weapon. Sarah drew and fired in the same motion, catching the lead man in the shoulder as he lunged toward her. The third attacker got his gun clear, but hesitated, unwilling to fire in a room full of witnesses. That hesitation cost him. Sarah put him down with a shot to the leg, then grabbed Max's harness and ran for the kitchen. Behind her, chaos erupted, screams and shouts and the crash of overturning tables. She hit the kitchen door at full speed, startling a cook who dropped a pan of sizzling meat. "Back door. Now." The cook pointed, too shocked to speak. Sarah and Max exploded through the exit into an alley that stank of garbage and wet concrete. She turned left, away from the street, sprinting toward the darkness at the alley's end. Sirens were already wailing in the distance, responding to reports of gunfire. The alley opened onto a side street, lined with parked cars and shuttered businesses. Sarah slowed to a walk, trying to blend in, trying to look like just another dog owner taking an evening stroll. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Her shoulder throbbed where she had hit the doorframe during her escape. Max limped slightly, blood darkening the fur on his flank. She ducked into the doorway of an abandoned shop and examined her partner. The wound was superficial, a graze from either glass or a bullet fragment. She cleaned it as best she could with water from her bottle and pressed a bandana against it until the bleeding slowed. "Good boy," she whispered. "Best boy. We are going to get through this." Max licked her face, his tail wagging despite the pain, his trust absolute and humbling. Sarah needed a new plan. Her safe house was burned, Rachel's apartment was probably compromised, and the diner shootout meant that every cop in the city would be looking for her by morning. She needed somewhere unexpected, somewhere outside the networks that Drake controlled. She thought of her sister Rebecca, who had left law enforcement years ago to teach middle school in Savannah. They had not spoken in months, casualties of busy lives and unresolved tensions, but blood was blood, and Rebecca had always been the one person who would never turn her away. Sarah found a payphone, an anachronism that somehow survived in this corner of Decatur. She fed quarters into the slot and dialed from memory. The phone rang 6 times before a familiar voice answered. "Hello? Beck, it is Sarah. I need help." The silence lasted only a second. "Where are you?" "Decatur. Near the old rail station. Stay there. I'm leaving now. It will take me 4 hours." "Beck, there are things I need to tell you, dangerous things. Tell me when I get there. Just stay hidden. I love you, sis." The line went dead. Sarah hung up and stepped back into the shadows. 4 hours. She could survive 4 hours. She found a spot in the ruins of an old textile factory, a place where homeless camps had once flourished before the city cleared them out. The roof leaked. The walls were tagged with graffiti, but the sight lines were good, and the multiple exits offered escape options. Max settled beside her, his body heat a comfort in the cool night air. Sarah did not sleep. She watched the darkness and listened to the city and thought about all the choices that had brought her to this moment. She thought about Robert Vargas, alone in his motel room, recording his final testament. She thought about the 37 witnesses whose names filled Drake's ledgers, men and women who had trusted the system and paid with their lives. She thought about justice, that abstract concept she had sworn to serve, and how easily it could be twisted into its opposite by those with power and without conscience. Around midnight, Her phone lit up with news alerts. The story had broken. Monica's article was spreading across social media like wildfire, its headlines screaming from every screen. Atlanta prosecutor and police captain accused of witness elimination scheme. The documents were embedded, the recordings transcribed, the financial trails laid bare for anyone to follow. Comments accumulated in real time, thousands of them, expressing outrage and disbelief and demands for accountability. Sarah watched the story explode and felt nothing but exhaustion. This was victory, she supposed. This was the system working as it was meant to work, sunlight as disinfectant, truth as weapon. But she was still hiding in an abandoned factory, still bleeding from encounters with men who wanted her dead, still uncertain whether she would survive the next few hours. At 4 in the morning, headlights swept across the factory's entrance. Sarah tensed, her weapon ready, until she heard her sister's voice calling from outside. "Sarah, it is me. I am alone." They embraced in the darkness, two women who had grown up dreaming of justice and found it more complicated than any childhood fantasy could encompass. Rebecca had brought supplies, food and water and fresh clothes and a first aid kit. She had also brought questions. "The story is everywhere," Rebecca said, as she cleaned and bandaged Max's wound. "Your name is being mentioned as a source. Some people are calling you a hero. Others are calling you a traitor. What do you think?" Rebecca looked at her sister with eyes that had seen their share of hard truths. "I think you did what needed to be done. I think you probably should have trusted me enough to call before it got this bad. And I think we need to get you somewhere safe before Drake's people regroup." They drove through the night, heading south towards Savannah. The interstate was empty at this hour, a ribbon of concrete cutting through Georgia's darkness. Max slept in the back seat, exhausted from the day's violence. Sarah watched the mile markers pass and tried to imagine what came next. Her phone rang as they crossed the county line. Unknown number, but she answered anyway. "Lieutenant Collins, this is Special Agent Patricia Morgan, FBI headquarters in Washington. I have been assigned to take your statement regarding the material published by the Atlanta Constitution. We need to meet." Sarah felt a spark of hope mixed with suspicion. "How do I know you are not one of them?" "A fair question." Agent Morgan's voice was calm, professional. "I am calling from a secure line at the Hoover Building. Director Martinez himself authorized this investigation 30 minutes ago. The Bureau is cleaning house, Lieutenant. Your evidence identified our leak. An agent named Chen, who has already been taken into custody. We are on the same side here." Sarah thought of the flash drive labeled RC. Rachel Chen, her ally, had unknowingly shared a name with a traitor. The universe had a dark sense of humor. "Where do you want to meet? We can come to you. Just tell us where you're going." Sarah hesitated. "Savannah. My sister has a place there. We will have agents there by morning. Until then, stay safe and stay hidden. And Lieutenant, thank you. What you did took courage that most people never find." The call ended. Sarah looked at Rebecca, who had heard enough to understand. "Sounds like you are going to be busy," Rebecca said. "Sounds like." The sun rose as they crossed into Chatham County, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed to promise new beginnings. Savannah's live oaks welcomed them with Spanish moss and ancient dignity. Rebecca's house was a restored Victorian in the historic district, charming and secure, and far from the chaos Sarah had left behind. She stood on the front porch as morning traffic began to fill the streets. As neighbors walked dogs and joggers past with earbuds trailing wires. Normal life, continuing regardless of conspiracies and corruption and the struggle between justice and its enemies. Max sat beside her, his wound bandaged, his eyes still bright with readiness. Agent Morgan arrived 3 hours later with a team of federal investigators. They set up in Rebecca's living room, recording equipment and laptops and the paraphernalia of official inquiry. Sarah told her story from the beginning, from the moment she received the call about the motel, to the shootout at the diner, to the long night of hiding and running. She answered every question, provided every detail, held nothing back. The investigation expanded hourly. Webb and Drake were arrested by noon. Herp walked in front of cameras that broadcast their humiliation to millions. Their network unraveled as associates turned on each other, seeking plea deals, offering testimony. The cartel connections drew DEA involvement. The federal corruption angle brought congressional attention. Sarah's name appeared in every story, sometimes as hero, sometimes as whistleblower, sometimes as target of criticism from those who still believed in the men she had exposed. Through it all, Max stayed by her side. In interview rooms and hotel suites and the back seats of federal vehicles, the Malinois remained her constant companion, her anchor to something pure in a world gone murky. He had saved her life in that diner, as he had saved it in the motel and would save it again before this ended. Their partnership transcended words, transcended species, bound by loyalty and trust that no conspiracy could corrupt. 3 weeks after the story broke, Sarah returned to Atlanta. The city welcomed her as a complicated hero, praised by some, resented by others, watched by everyone. The department had been restructured, new leadership installed, promises made about accountability and reform. Whether those promises would be kept remained to be seen. She stood in the parking lot of the Riverside Motel on a spring evening, when the light turned everything golden. The establishment had been closed, its doors sealed, its rooms awaiting the wrecking ball that would erase this chapter from the landscape. Room 14's window still showed the damage from that violent night, a dark mouth in the building's face, speaking of secrets that could not stay buried. Max sat beside her, his coat gleaming in the sunset light. He had healed well, the graze on his flank now just another scar among many. His eyes tracked a bird crossing the parking lot, but his body remained relaxed, at ease for the first time in weeks. Sarah thought about Robert Vargas, whose testimony had made all this possible. She had learned more about him in the investigation's aftermath. A father of 2 grown daughters, a man who had made mistakes with the cartel but tried to make them right, a witness who had understood that his death could have meaning if the truth survived him. His family had reached out to thank her, their gratitude mixed with grief, the complex emotions of those left behind when someone dies for something larger than themselves. She thought about Drake and Webb, whose trials would consume the next several years in legal proceedings and appeals, and the slow grinding of judicial machinery. They would spend the rest of their lives in prison, assuming the other inmates did not deliver their own justice to men who had betrayed the badge. She found she did not care what happened to them. They had made their choices, and now they would live with the consequences. She thought about the 37 witnesses whose names she now knew by heart, men and women who had trusted the system and been betrayed by it. Their families would receive some measure of closure from the convictions to come, but closure was not the same as healing. Some wounds never fully closed. Her phone buzzed with a message from Monica Reyes. The journalist had become something like a friend in the weeks since the story broke. 2 women bonded by their shared role in bringing down monsters. The message was simple. Pulitzer Committee announced finalists today. We made the list. Sarah smiled slightly and tucked the phone away. Awards and accolades meant less to her than they once might have. She had done what needed doing, not for recognition, but because silence would have been complicity. The rest was noise. Max stood suddenly, his attention snapping to the entrance of the parking lot. A car was approaching, a familiar, unmarked cruiser that Sarah recognized from her own motor pool. It stopped 20 feet away, and a woman emerged from the driver's seat. Lieutenant Collins, Captain Jennifer Walsh, newly appointed commander of the Major Crimes Division, extended her hand. I have been looking for you. Sarah accepted the handshake. "Captain, congratulations on the promotion." Walsh smiled wryly. "Someone had to clean up the mess. I was hoping you might help me. The department needs officers we can trust, now more than ever. I am offering you a position in my unit, if you want it." Sarah looked at Max, then at the motel, then at the captain, waiting for her answer. The city stretched around them in all directions, its skyline familiar and foreign at once. Somewhere out there, crimes were being committed. Victims needed advocates. Justice needed warriors. "What kind of position?" Sarah asked. "Whatever kind you want. Investigator, handler, supervisor. You have proven you can be trusted when trust matters most. Name your terms." Sarah considered the offer. Part of her wanted to walk away, to leave Atlanta behind and find peace somewhere quiet, somewhere without conspiracies and corruption and the constant weight of responsibility, but that part was smaller than she expected, overwhelmed by the larger truth she had discovered about herself in these brutal weeks. She was a cop. Not because of the badge or the gun or the paycheck, but because protecting people was written into her DNA. She could not stand by while predators hunted the innocent. She could not stay silent while injustice flourished. She was built for this work, and walking away would be a betrayal of everything she believed. "K-9 unit," she said finally. "Max and me, we work best together." Walsh nodded. "Done. Report Monday morning, 0800. We have cases waiting." The captain drove away, leaving Sarah alone with her partner in the fading light. She knelt beside Max and scratched behind his ears, that spot he loved, the one that made his leg twitch involuntarily. "What do you think, boy? Ready to get back to work?" Max licked her face and wagged his tail, his answer clear in every line of his body. He was ready. He had always been ready. That was who he was. Just as fighting for justice was who she was. They walked back to her car together as the sun finally slipped below the horizon. The city's lights began to flicker on, a constellation of human activity, human need, human hope. Somewhere in that maze of streets and buildings, someone was in trouble. Somewhere, a crime was unfolding. Somewhere, justice needed a champion. Sarah started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, Max settling into his familiar position in the back seat. The radio crackled with dispatch traffic, the endless chatter of a city's emergencies. She listened for a moment, then reached for the receiver. "Dispatch, this is Lieutenant Collins, K-9 unit back in service." The radio crackled with acknowledgement. "Welcome back, Lieutenant. We have a situation developing in Buckhead. Armed robbery in progress. Suspects fleeing on foot." Sarah hit the lights and sirens and pressed the accelerator. Beside her, Max shifted into alert mode, his body tense with anticipation. The city blurred past them in streaks of light and shadow, beautiful and dangerous and endlessly demanding. This was her life. This was her calling. And despite everything she had been through, everything she had lost and learned and survived, she would not have it any other way. The siren wailed as they raced through the night, two partners bound by duty and devotion, hunting justice through streets that never slept. Behind them, the motel faded into darkness, its secrets finally exposed to light. Ahead lay the unknown, the next case, the next challenge, the next test of courage and conviction. Sarah Collins drove toward it without hesitation. She was ready. She had always been ready. The suspect had a 30-second head start, but 30 seconds meant nothing to Max. The Malinois hit the ground running the moment Sarah opened his door, his nose immediately locking onto the scent trail that wound through Buckhead's upscale streets. Sarah followed, her boots pounding the sidewalk, her weapon holstered but ready. The jewelry store's shattered window gaped behind them like a wound. Inside, employees were still screaming, customers were still crying, the chaos of violations still echoing off glass display cases. But Sarah's focus was ahead, on the shadow fleeing through the maze of boutiques and restaurants, on her partner's relentless pursuit. Max moved like liquid through the darkness, adjusting to obstacles without breaking stride. He leaped a bench, ducked under a cafe table, rounded a corner with the precision of a guided missile. The suspect was fast, clearly in shape, probably young. But he was running blind, panicked, making mistakes. Max did not make mistakes. Sarah saw the moment it happened. The suspect tried to scale a fence, got halfway up, and Max launched. 70 pounds of determined Malinois hit the man's leg and pulled. The suspect screamed, lost his grip, crashed to the ground. By the time Sarah arrived 5 seconds later, Max had him pinned, teeth bared, every muscle promising violence if the man so much as twitched. "Stay down," Sarah commanded, weapon drawn now, covering the suspect while reaching for her cuffs. "Do not move." The man did not move. He lay face down on the concrete, Max standing on his back, and he did not move at all. Sarah secured the suspect with practiced efficiency, reading rights, checking for weapons, calling for backup and transport. The stolen jewelry was still in his pockets, thousands of dollars in diamonds and gold that would be returned to their rightful owners. Another case closed, another criminal caught, another small victory in the endless war. She looked at Max, who had relaxed from attack mode to guardian mode, still watching the suspect, but no longer threatening immediate violence. Blood darkened the man's pants where teeth had found flesh, but the wound was superficial. Max knew exactly how much force to apply, exactly where to strike, exactly when to stop. His training was flawless. "Good boy," Sarah said, offering him the praise he had earned. "Best boy in the city." Max's tail wagged once, a brief acknowledgement before returning to professional alertness. He would celebrate later when the work was done. For now, there was a suspect to guard and a scene to secure. Backup arrived in waves, patrol cars, detectives, crime scene technicians. The jewelry store employees gave statements. Security footage was collected. The suspect, a repeat offender with a history of similar crimes, was loaded into a transport vehicle and driven toward the processing center, where he would begin his journey through the justice system. Sarah stood apart from the bustle, watching her colleagues work. These were good people, most of them. Dedicated officers who had nothing to do with Drake's corruption, who came to work every day trying to make the city a little bit safer. The bad apples had been removed, and what remained was a department trying to rebuild trust it had never deserved to lose. Captain Walsh appeared at her elbow, having arrived to observe her first case back. "Clean arrest? Good work?" "Suspect is already talking, apparently. Wants to make a deal in exchange for information about his fence." Sarah nodded. "Sounds like a job for major crimes." Walsh smiled. "Indeed it does. Get some rest, Lieutenant. Same time tomorrow." The captain walked away, and Sarah was left alone with Max in the aftermath of violence. The jewelry store was being boarded up. The last witnesses were being released. The flashing lights were being extinguished one by one. Soon this corner of Buckhead would return to its normal rhythms, its wealthy residents and expensive merchandise and careful security that had failed to prevent tonight's crime. Sarah led Max back to their cruiser. The Malinois jumped into his compartment without hesitation, settling into the familiar space with a contented sigh. Sarah took her seat behind the wheel and just sat for a moment, absorbing the quiet. Her phone showed 3 missed calls from Rebecca, probably wanting to check in, probably worried despite Sarah's assurances that she was fine. There were also emails from federal prosecutors, journalist inquiries, messages from colleagues she barely remembered. The aftermath of her whistleblowing continued to generate attention, continued to demand her participation in processes she had set in motion. She ignored all of it for now. There would be time tomorrow for calls and emails and the obligations of accountability. Tonight, she just wanted to drive through the city she had sworn to protect, to feel its pulse, to remember why she had chosen this life. She started the engine and pulled away from the scene. The streets of Buckhead gave way to Midtown's towers, then downtown's canyon walls, then the older neighborhoods where history lived in every brick and board. She drove without destination, letting instinct guide her, letting the city reveal itself in the amber glow of streetlights. Max watched through his window, alert to everything, relaxed about nothing. He was a working dog to his core, incapable of truly going off duty. Even now, Sarah knew he was processing scents, tracking movements, building a mental map of territory they might need to navigate at any moment. She thought about the path that had brought her here. The academy years, the patrol shifts, the slow climb through ranks that had seemed impenetrable until they suddenly were not. She thought about the partners she had lost along the way, the cases that still haunted her sleep, the moments of doubt that came in the small hours when the badge felt heavier than lead. She thought about Max, who had been there through most of it, who had never wavered, never questioned, never asked for anything but the chance to work beside her. 7 years of partnership had created something between them that transcended the ordinary bond of handler and dog. They were two halves of a single unit, incomplete without each other, unstoppable together. The city continued to scroll past, its stories unfolding in every lit window and dark alley. Somewhere lovers were arguing, somewhere families were gathering, somewhere crimes were being planned and committed and solved. The endless cycle of human existence spinning on, regardless of who watched or cared. Sarah found herself at the waterfront, where the Chattahoochee River slid past like black silk under the moon. She parked and let Max out, and they walked along the shore together, the only sounds the water's whisper and their own footsteps on gravel. The night was warm for spring, the air heavy with moisture that promised rain before dawn. Sarah breathed deeply and let the tension drain from her shoulders. The case was closed. The suspect was caught. Tomorrow there would be more cases, more suspects, more tension, but tonight she could rest. Max found a stick and brought it to her, his tail wagging hopefully. Even after everything, even after the motel and the shootings and the weeks of running, he still wanted to play. His capacity for joy in the simple things never failed to humble her. She threw the stick and watched him bound after it, a shadow against shadows, pure movement and purpose. He retrieved it and brought it back, and she threw it again. They played until Max finally tired, dropping the stick at her feet and pressing against her leg with a contented sigh. "Time to go home, boy," Sarah said, scratching behind his ears. "We have work tomorrow." They returned to the cruiser and drove through streets that were emptier now, the city surrendering to the small hours when only the desperate and the dedicated remained awake. Sarah navigated from memory to her apartment, the same place she had lived for 5 years, somehow untouched by the chaos that had consumed the rest of her life. She had expected it to feel different, returning after everything, but it felt exactly the same. The same stairs, the same door, the same smell of old wood and older paint. Max padded inside and immediately checked every room, confirming that no threats lurked in corners, before settling on his bed with a satisfied grunt. Sarah stood at her window and looked out at the city lights. Down there, millions of people were sleeping, working, living, dying. They would never know her name or her story, would never understand what she had sacrificed to protect them. That was fine. That was how it should be. The work was not about recognition or gratitude. It was about making the world slightly less dangerous for those who had no way to protect themselves. She thought about Robert Vargas one more time. His recording had mentioned a desire for his death to matter, for the truth to survive him. That wish had been granted. His evidence had brought down monsters, had exposed corruption that might have festered for decades more. He had not died in vain. None of them had died in vain, she realized. The 37 witnesses whose names she carried in her heart, the victims of Webb and Drake's conspiracy, they had all contributed to this moment. Their deaths had created the paper trail, the financial records, the damning evidence that could not be buried forever. In their absence, justice had finally found its voice. Sarah turned from the window and began her nightly routine. Weapon cleaned and secured, uniform hung for tomorrow, shower to wash away the day's accumulated stress. Then bed, Max curled at her feet, both of them surrendering to exhaustion they had earned. Sleep came quickly, and with it dreams. Not nightmares tonight, though those would return eventually. Tonight, she dreamed of open fields and endless skies, of running without pursuit, of peace that might exist somewhere beyond the horizon. Max ran beside her in the dream, young and tireless and free. When her alarm sounded 6 hours later, Sarah woke with the dream already fading but its residue remaining. She felt better than she had in weeks, lighter somehow, as if setting down a burden she had not realized she was carrying. Max was already awake, waiting by the door, ready for whatever the day would bring. Sarah, dressed in clean uniform, checked her equipment, and headed out to face the city that needed her. The morning was bright with promise. The sky had cleared overnight, leaving air that smelled fresh and almost clean, a rarity in Atlanta's perpetual battle with humidity. Traffic was building on the main arteries, commuters beginning their daily migrations, the city stirring to life like a massive organism awakening from slumber. Sarah drove to the precinct, through neighborhoods that showed the full spectrum of urban existence. Poverty next to wealth, decay next to renewal, despair next to hope. This was the territory she had sworn to protect in all its contradiction and complexity. The precinct itself had changed since her last visit. New leadership meant new priorities, visible in the reorganized workspaces and updated equipment. Faces she recognized nodded greetings, some warm, some wary. Her reputation preceded her now, the whistleblower who had brought down a captain. Some saw courage in that act, others saw betrayal. The truth was probably somewhere in between. Captain Walsh met her at the entrance to the K-9 unit. "Lieutenant, ready for your first full day back?" "Ready as I will ever be." "Good. We have a situation developing in Midtown. Reports of an explosive device at Peachtree Tower. Bomb squad is en route. But they have requested K-9 support for sweep operations. You are up." Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that preceded every critical call. Max sensed it and responded in kind, his body shifting from relaxed to alert in a heartbeat. They had trained for this scenario dozens of times. The reality would test that training in ways practice never could. She drove with lights and sirens, weaving through traffic that parted reluctantly, arriving at Peachtree Tower to find organized chaos. Police lines were established, evacuation was underway, the bomb squad's armored vehicle squatted near the building's entrance like a mechanical toad. Television crews were already setting up at the perimeter, their cameras hungry for footage of potential disaster. The bomb squad commander, a grizzled sergeant named Torres, briefed her quickly. "Anonymous call came in 40 minutes ago, said there was a device in the building's parking structure. We have not found anything yet, but the caller had specific details that suggest this is not a hoax. What do you need from us? Max is the best explosives dog in the city. Start on the lowest level and work up. We will coordinate from here." Sarah led Max into the parking structure's echoing concrete cavern. Emergency lights cast everything in shades of red and shadow. The space was empty of vehicles, evacuated, but full of hiding places where a device could be concealed. Every pillar, every corner, every maintenance closet represented potential danger. Max worked methodically, his nose hovering inches above the ground, processing thousands of scent molecules per second. Sarah followed 3 feet behind, close enough to respond to his signals, far enough to survive if something went wrong. The silence was oppressive, broken only by their footsteps and Max's occasional snuffling. They cleared the first level in 15 minutes, then the second, then the third. With each empty floor, Sarah's tension increased rather than decreased. If the device existed, they were getting closer to it. If the call was a hoax, they were wasting time while the real attack unfolded somewhere else. On the 4th level, Max stopped. His head came up. His ears pricked forward. His body went rigid with the particular intensity that Sarah recognized as a positive alert. He was onto something. She approached slowly, watching him, reading his signals. He moved toward a utility closet in the structure's corner, his focus absolute. At the closet door, he sat and looked at her, his way of saying, "I found it without words." Sarah keyed her radio. "Lieutenant Collins to command. K-9 has indicated positive on level 4, northwest corner, utility closet, requesting bomb squad." The response was immediate. "Understood. Squad is en route. Back away and maintain visual contact." She retreated with Max to the recommended safe distance, a calculation based on estimated blast radius and structural factors. The bomb squad arrived 2 minutes later, their protective suits making them look like astronauts exploring an alien world. The next hour passed in suspended animation. Sarah watched from a distance as technicians examined the closet, deployed their robot, analyzed what they found inside. Max stayed alert beside her, his job done, but his vigilance undiminished. Around them, the parking structure remained frozen in emergency lighting, a concrete purgatory waiting for deliverance or destruction. Finally, Torres approached with news. Device was real. Pipe bomb. Crude but functional. Timer was set for noon. "Your dog saved a lot of lives today, Lieutenant." Sarah felt the tension release in a flood of relief. "Any leads on who planted it?" "We recovered prints. Processing now. Also found a burner phone that might give us communication records. Someone wanted to make a statement here, thanks to Max. The only statement being made is that our K-9 unit does not mess around." She looked at her partner, who was accepting praise from admiring bomb technicians with his typical dignity. 7 years together, and he still amazed her. Still found ways to prove that the bond between them was more than training, more than partnership, more than anything she had words to describe. The scene took hours to fully process. By the time Sarah and Max were released, the afternoon sun was slanting through the city's towers, painting long shadows across evacuated streets. The television crews had gotten their footage, the building's occupants were returning to their offices, and normal life was resuming its interrupted flow. Sarah drove back to the precinct with a strange sense of completion. 2 cases in less than 24 hours. 1 arrest, 1 bomb defused. Not bad for a return from what had essentially been witness protection. Captain Walsh was waiting when she arrived. "I heard about Peachtree Tower. Good work, Lieutenant. Max earned his kibble today." "He always does." Walsh nodded. "Something else." "The suspect from last night, the jewelry store robbery. He gave us a name. His fence operates out of a warehouse in College Park. Same warehouse mentioned in the documents you recovered from that motel room." Sarah felt the connection click into place. Drake's network was not fully dismantled. Pieces remained, operating in the shadows, continuing crimes that the conspiracy had enabled. "I want that warehouse," she said. Walsh smiled. "I was hoping you would say that. Briefing in 1 hour. We are taking it down tonight." The briefing filled the conference room with detectives, tactical officers, and federal liaisons who had remained in Atlanta to help clean up the mess Webb and Drake had left behind. Sarah presented the intelligence she had gathered from the jewelry suspect's confession, cross-referenced with the motel documents. The warehouse in College Park was a nexus point, a distribution center for stolen goods that fed into the same networks the cartel had used. "We hit them at midnight," Walsh announced. 3 teams. Lieutenant Collins and Max will be with Alpha Team, handling initial entry and sweep. Any questions? There were questions, dozens of them, about logistics and contingencies and rules of engagement. Sarah answered what she could and deferred the rest to the tactical commander who would run the operation. By the time the briefing ended, everyone understood their role in the complex choreography about to unfold. She spent the remaining hours preparing: equipment check, route planning, mental rehearsal of scenarios she might encounter. Max rested beside her, conserving energy for the night ahead. They had done this dance before many times, but each operation was different, each target unique. Complacency killed more officers than bullets. At 11:30, the convoy assembled in a staging area 3 blocks from the target. Black vehicles, dark uniforms, serious faces illuminated by dashboard lights and tactical screens. Sarah sat in the lead vehicle with the Alpha Team commander, a lieutenant named Jackson, whose reputation for precision was legendary in tactical circles. "Everyone clear on the plan?" Jackson asked. "Affirmatives all around." "Then let us go." The vehicles moved out in silent procession, ghosts gliding through College Park's industrial district. The warehouse loomed ahead, a massive structure of corrugated metal and dirty windows, surrounded by chain-link fence and patrolled by guards whose silhouettes were visible against security lights. Alpha Team stopped 200 yards from the main gate. Sarah released Max and they moved on foot, approaching from the angle that surveillance had identified as the blind spot in patrol patterns. Her night vision painted the world in shades of green, revealing obstacles and threats that daylight would have made obvious. They reached the fence without incident. Cutters made quick work of the chain link, opening a gap wide enough for tactical entry. One by one, the team slipped through, spreading out to cover assigned sectors. Max led the approach to the side entrance, his nose working constantly, checking for tripwires, explosives, anything that might turn this raid into a catastrophe. He found nothing, signaling the all clear with a glance back at Sarah that conveyed more than words ever could. She stacked up beside the door with 2 other officers. On Jackson's signal, they breached. The door crashed inward. Flashbangs followed, their deafening thunder and blinding light disorienting everyone inside. Sarah swept right, Max surging ahead, her weapon tracking threats that materialized and vanished in the strobing chaos. "Contact left," someone shouted. Shots cracked through the warehouse's vast interior, echoing off metal walls. Sarah identified targets through her optics, 2 men with weapons, engaging. She fired twice, saw 1 drop, heard her partner officer account for the second. Max had found the office area, a cluster of prefab structures within the larger warehouse. He was barking at a locked door, signaling that someone hid behind it. Sarah approached, shouting commands. "Police, come out with your hands up." Movement inside. The door opened a crack, then swung wide. A man emerged, hands raised, face pale with terror. Behind him, Sarah could see computer equipment, filing cabinets, the administrative heart of an operation that had funded criminal enterprises for years. On the ground. Now. The man complied. Sarah secured him while other officers cleared the rest of the office. More suspects were being rounded up throughout the warehouse, their resistance crumbling in the face of overwhelming force and perfect execution. Jackson's voice crackled over the radio. "Building secure. 14 suspects in custody. No casualties our side. Good work, everyone." Sarah stood in the warehouse's center, surrounded by evidence of crimes that had festered in shadow for too long. Crates of stolen merchandise, weapons, drug paraphernalia, the stench of corruption made physical, made tangible, made finally accountable. Max sat beside her, panting slightly from exertion, his eyes bright with the satisfaction of work well done. She knelt and scratched behind his ears, murmuring praise that he acknowledged with a quick lick to her hand. This was what it meant to be a cop. Not the politics, not the paperwork, not the endless compromises that institutional life demanded. This, the moment when justice became more than an abstraction, when the innocent were protected and the guilty were held to account. This was why she had stayed, why she had fought, why she would keep fighting as long as breath remained in her body. The cleanup took hours. Evidence was catalogued. Suspects were processed. The media was managed with careful statements that revealed enough to satisfy public interest without compromising ongoing investigations. By the time Sarah finally headed home, dawn was breaking over the city, painting the skyline in shades of rose and gold. She drove through streets that were beginning to fill with early commuters, normal people starting normal days. They would read about the raid in their morning news, would note it, and move on to sports scores and weather forecasts. They would never know the hours of planning, the moments of terror, the split-second decisions that had made the difference between success and failure. That was fine. That was how it should be. The work was not about recognition. Sarah pulled into her parking space and sat for a moment, absorbing the silence. Max was asleep in back, exhausted from a night of work that had pushed both of them to their limits. She felt the weight of fatigue in every muscle, the need for sleep that would claim her the moment she stopped moving. But she also felt something else. Pride, maybe, or satisfaction, or simply the bone-deep knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. She opened the door and stepped out into the morning light. The sun was warm on her face, the air fresh with the promise of a new day. Somewhere in the city, someone was planning a crime. Somewhere else, someone was becoming a victim. The cycle never ended, never paused, never showed mercy to those caught in its machinery. But today, at least, justice had won a battle. And tomorrow, Sarah Collins and her partner Max would be back on the streets, ready to fight again. She climbed the stairs to her apartment, Max padding faithfully beside her. At the door she paused and looked back at the city spread below. "Same time tomorrow, boy," she said. Max wagged his tail. They went inside together, partners bound by something stronger than words, ready to face whatever came next, because in this city there was always a next, and they would always be ready. The weeks that followed brought a rhythm that Sarah had almost forgotten, the rhythm of normal police work, cases that did not involve conspiracies or assassination attempts, crimes that could be solved with good detective work and a talented K-9 partner. She found herself settling back into patterns that predated the motel, predated the nightmare of discovering corruption in her own chain of command. Max seemed to thrive on the return to routine. His energy remained boundless, his enthusiasm for each new case undimmed by the traumas they had survived together. Sometimes Sarah watched him work a crime scene and marveled at his resilience, his ability to move forward without being weighted down by the past. Dogs lived in the present in ways humans could only envy. One morning, 3 weeks after the warehouse raid, Sarah arrived at the precinct to find an envelope on her desk. No return address, no postmark, hand-delivered sometime during the night. She opened it carefully, mindful of the threats that still occasionally materialized from Webb and Drake's dismantled network. Inside, she found a photograph and a handwritten note. The photograph showed a family, parents, and 2 adult daughters standing in front of a modest house with smiles that spoke of genuine happiness. The note was brief. "Lieutenant Collins, my father was Robert Vargas. Because of what you did, we finally have answers. We finally have closure. We cannot thank you enough. The Vargas family." Sarah stared at the photograph for a long time. Robert Vargas, the man whose testimony had started everything, the witness who had known he was going to die and chosen to leave evidence anyway. His family had found peace because she had not walked away, had not stayed silent, had not let convenience triumph over conscience. She tucked the photograph into her wallet, a reminder that the work mattered even when the victories felt small. The call came at 10 that morning. Missing person, potentially endangered, last seen in the old 4th Ward neighborhood. A 20-year-old woman named Diana Reyes had failed to return home after her shift at a local restaurant. Her car was found abandoned in a parking lot, her purse and phone still inside. No witnesses, no obvious signs of struggle, no leads. Sarah and Max joined the search as it expanded from the immediate area to the surrounding blocks. The neighborhood was densely populated, its mix of renovated buildings and unrenovated decay creating countless places where someone could be hidden or held. Patrol officers canvassed while detectives interviewed the restaurant staff. Sarah let Max work the parking lot, hoping to pick up a scent trail that might indicate which direction Diana had gone. The Malinois circled the abandoned vehicle 3 times before locking onto something. His body language shifted, that particular intensity that Sarah had learned to read over years of partnership. He had found a trail. Max, track. The dog moved with purpose, following invisible molecules that painted a picture only he could perceive. Sarah followed, hand on her weapon, radio updating their position as they progressed. The trail led away from the parking lot, down an alley, around a corner, into the tangled streets where gentrification and poverty existed in uneasy proximity. They tracked for 20 minutes, Max occasionally pausing to recalibrate, to separate Diana's scent from the thousands of others that competed for his attention. The trail ended at a door, an entrance to a basement apartment in a building that had seen better decades. Max sat and looked at Sarah, his signal unmistakable. She keyed her radio. Lieutenant Collins. K-9 indicates strong positive at 847 Edgewood Avenue basement unit, requesting backup and possible hostage situation protocol. The response was immediate. Units en route. ETA 3 minutes. 3 minutes was too long if someone inside that basement was in immediate danger. Sarah weighed her options, training and instinct warring with protocol and prudence. She could wait for backup. The safe choice, the choice that any supervisor would endorse. Or she could act now, alone, gambling that speed might save a life. Max decided for her. He lunged at the door with a bark that echoed off the buildings, announcing their presence to whoever waited inside. So much for the element of surprise. "Police!" Sarah shouted. "Open the door!" Sounds from within. Footsteps, voices, something crashing. Then the door burst open and a man emerged, wild-eyed, a knife in his hand, charging directly at Sarah. Max intercepted him before he could take 3 steps. The Malinois hit the man mid-stride, jaws locking on his knife arm with practiced precision. They went down together in a tangle of fur and flesh and screaming. Sarah kicked the knife away and had the man in cuffs before backup even arrived. She entered the basement apartment with her weapon drawn, clearing room by room. In the back, bound to a chair but alive and alert, she found Diana Reyes. The young woman's face was bruised, her wrists raw from the ropes, but her eyes showed relief rather than trauma. "Police," Sarah said, holstering her weapon and moving to cut the ropes. "You are safe now. You are going to be okay." Diana started crying. Great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. Sarah held her until the paramedics arrived, until the young woman was wrapped in a blanket and led toward the waiting ambulance. The man who had taken her, a former co-worker with a history of stalking behavior, was loaded into a patrol car, his face swelling where Max's teeth had left their mark. Captain Walsh arrived as the scene was being documented. She surveyed the situation, nodded at the handcuffed suspect, observed Diana being treated, and finally turned to Sarah. "That could have gone very differently," she said. "It could have," Sarah agreed. "But it did not." Walsh studied her for a long moment. "Your instincts are good, Lieutenant. Better than good. Just remember that we need you around for the long haul. Taking unnecessary risks helps no one." Sarah accepted the mild rebuke with grace. She knew Walsh was right, knew that her actions had been impulsive, driven by urgency that might have been patience in another officer. But she also knew that Diana Reyes was alive because of those actions, would go home to her family, because Max had tracked her scent, and Sarah had trusted that tracking without hesitation. The job was full of such contradictions. Rules existed for good reasons, yet sometimes breaking them saved lives. Caution protected officers from harm, yet sometimes harm came regardless. There were no easy answers, no formulas that guaranteed success. There was only the moment, the choice, the willingness to act when action was needed. She returned to the precinct as the afternoon faded, wrote up her reports, fielded questions from curious colleagues. Diana's rescue was already making local news, another story of the K-9 unit's effectiveness, another data point in the department's ongoing effort to rebuild public trust. Sarah did not watch the coverage. She knew what had happened better than any reporter could describe it. Instead, she took Max for a walk along the Beltline, that converted railroad corridor that had become the spine of Atlanta's recreational life. Joggers passed them, cyclists rang bells, families strolled with children who pointed at Max with delight. This was the city she protected. Not the abstractions of law and order, not the statistics of crime rates and clearance rates, but these actual people living actual lives. They would never know her name, never understand the sacrifices that made their safety possible. That was fine. That was how it should be. She stopped at a bench overlooking the city skyline and sat, Max settling at her feet with a contented sigh. The sun was setting behind the towers, painting the glass and steel in shades of fire. Somewhere out there, crimes were being committed. Somewhere out there, people were suffering. But here, now, in this moment, there was peace. Sarah pulled out her phone and called her sister. Rebecca answered on the second ring. "Hey, stranger, I was wondering when you would check in." "Busy few weeks," Sarah said. "How are things in Savannah?" They talked for half an hour, catching up on the minutiae of lives that had diverged, but never truly separated. Rebecca was seeing someone new, a fellow teacher with a passion for kayaking. Sarah shared stories from recent cases, carefully edited to remove the more disturbing details. They laughed about childhood memories and made plans to visit when schedules allowed. When the call ended, Sarah felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fading sun. Family mattered, connections mattered. No matter how consuming the work became, she needed to remember that she was more than her badge, more than her cases, more than the endless struggle against entropy and evil. Max nudged her hand, reminding her that the evening was cooling and his stomach was empty. She smiled and stood, stretching muscles that had stiffened during the conversation. "Time to go home, boy. Let me feed you." They walked back along the Beltline as darkness claimed the city. Lights flickered on in windows, street lamps hummed to life, the transition from day to night unfolding with the smoothness of long practice. Atlanta was settling into its evening rhythms, the day shift giving way to the night shift, the visible world yielding to the invisible. At her apartment, Sarah prepared Max's dinner while her own meal heated in the microwave. They ate together in comfortable silence, the television murmuring news that she half-watched without really absorbing. Another day survived, another set of cases addressed, another small push against the tide of chaos that threatened to overwhelm. Her phone buzzed with a message from Monica Reyes. The journalist had become a regular correspondent, someone who understood the world Sarah navigated without being consumed by it. "Heard about the rescue today. Nice work. Coffee next week?" Sarah typed a quick affirmative and set the phone aside. The connections she was building, with Rachel and Monica and others who had become part of her life through the crucible of the corruption case, felt important in ways she was still learning to appreciate. She had spent too many years isolated, defining herself solely through work, forgetting that humans needed more than purpose to thrive. Max finished his dinner and sought his favorite spot on the couch, circling 3 times before settling with his head on his paws. Sarah joined him, her hand resting on his warm fur, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new challenges, new tests of skill and will and courage. But tonight, she could rest. Tonight she could simply exist, a woman and her dog in a quiet apartment, the city humming around them like a great machine that never quite stopped. She thought about Robert Vargas and his final recording, about the 37 names she carried in her memory, about Webb and Drake and all the others who had corrupted the institutions meant to serve justice. She thought about the work that remained, the networks still operating, the criminals still evading accountability. There was so much left to do, but there was also this: the small moments of peace between battles, the connections that sustained her, the knowledge that her efforts mattered, that lives had been saved, that justice had been served even imperfectly. Max shifted in his sleep, his legs twitching with dreams of pursuits she could only imagine. Sarah smiled and closed her eyes, letting exhaustion claim her at last. Tomorrow they would hunt again. Tomorrow they would face whatever the city threw at them. Tomorrow the work would continue. But tonight there was rest, and that was enough. The morning arrived with the insistence of an alarm clock that refused to be ignored. Sarah groaned, reached for the offending device, and silenced it with a slap that was perhaps more forceful than necessary. Max was already awake, watching her from the foot of the bed with the patient expectation of a partner who knew their routine down to the minute. She showered, dressed, ate a breakfast that was more obligation than pleasure, and prepared for another day of whatever the city had in store. The normality of it all felt strange after the chaos of recent weeks, but strange in a good way. Normal meant no one was trying to kill her. Normal meant the system was functioning as intended. Normal was underrated. The precinct hummed with its usual morning energy when she arrived. Officers coming off night shift briefed their day shift counterparts. Detectives hunched over desks, working cases that would consume their waking hours. The coffee pot burbled its eternal promise of chemical alertness. Captain Walsh caught her in the hallway. "Lieutenant, my office." "Now." Sarah followed, her mind already cataloguing possibilities. Had something happened overnight? Was there a new development in one of her cases? Was she about to receive commendation or criticism? Walsh closed the door behind them and gestured to a chair. "Sit. This is going to take a moment." Sarah sat. Max settled beside her, alert to the tension in the room. "I received a call this morning from the mayor's office," Walsh began, "followed by calls from the governor's office and the FBI. It seems your actions over the past several weeks have attracted attention at levels far above my pay grade." "What kind of attention?" Walsh leaned back in her chair, studying Sarah with an expression that mixed respect with something like concern. "The kind that leads to job offers. The governor wants to appoint you to lead a new task force on public corruption. The FBI is interested in recruiting you for their organized crime division. And the mayor wants to know if you would consider running for sheriff when the current one retires next year." Sarah felt the weight of these possibilities settle on her shoulders. 3 paths, each leading in different directions, each requiring her to become something other than what she currently was: a task force leader, a federal agent, a politician. "I am a cop," she said finally. "A K-9 handler. That is what I do, that is what I am good at." Walsh nodded slowly. "I told them you would probably say something like that. But I want you to think about it. The work you did exposed systemic corruption. You have skills that could make a difference at larger scales. Or I could stay here and keep making a difference one case at a time." "You could," Walsh agreed, "and no one would fault you for it." Sarah looked at Max, who met her gaze with uncomplicated devotion. He did not care about task forces or agencies. He cared about work, about partnership, about simple satisfaction. "Can I have some time?" Walsh smiled. "Take a week to think. Sometimes the hardest part of this job is learning when to grow." Sarah left the captain's office with her mind churning. She had never considered herself leadership material, had never aspired to anything beyond being the best street cop she could be. But Walsh's words echoed in her thoughts as she went through the motions of the morning routine. Where could she do the most good? The question stayed with her through a quiet patrol shift, through a lunch eaten at her desk while reviewing case files, through an afternoon meeting about departmental policy changes. It was still there when she took Max for their evening walk along the belt line, the city spreading around them in all its chaotic beauty. She found herself at the same bench where she had sat before, overlooking the skyline that represented everything she had sworn to protect. The sun was setting again, painting the clouds in shades of purple and gold. Atlanta stretched to the horizon, millions of lives intersecting in patterns too complex for any single mind to comprehend. Where could she do the most good? Max pressed against her leg, and she scratched behind his ears automatically, drawing comfort from the contact. He would follow her anywhere she knew, task force, FBI, sheriff's office, or right back to the streets. His loyalty was not contingent on her choices, only on her presence. But that was not quite true, was it? Max was a working dog. He needed work to thrive, needed the daily challenges that gave his life meaning. Behind a desk, he would wither. In a political role, he would be nothing more than a prop. Only on the streets, only in the field, could he be fully himself. And maybe that was true for her as well. She pulled out her phone and called Captain Walsh. "I have made my decision," she said when Walsh answered. "That was fast. I thought you would need the full week. I thought so too. But then I realized the answer was obvious. The answer had been sitting beside me the whole time." Walsh was silent for a moment. "The streets, then?" "The streets," Sarah confirmed. "That is where I belong. That is where we can do the most good." Walsh's sigh came through the phone, but it was the sigh of acceptance rather than disappointment. "I will pass along your decision to the relevant parties. But, Lieutenant, if you ever change your mind, those doors will still be open." The call ended. Sarah looked at Max, who was watching a squirrel with the focused attention of a predator awaiting permission to pursue. "Just you and me, boy," she said. "Same as always." Max's tail wagged once, an acknowledgement that needed no translation. They sat together as the sun completed its descent, as the city lights began their nightly battle against the darkness. Somewhere out there, crimes were being committed. Somewhere out there, people needed help. Tomorrow, they would answer those calls, would track those scents, would fight those battles. But tonight, there was just this: a woman and her dog, watching the city they protected. She had walked this path for years. She would walk it for years more, not because it was easy, but because it was right. Max stirred. They walked through dusk, bound by something stronger. City waited. The work went on, always.